Canto Valley is a weird place. Whether it's the albino deer that fill the woods, their odd appearance matching with their decidedly unnatural behavior, or the bend in the highway outside of town that has an inexplicably high number of fatal car crashes no matter how many safety measures are taken, or how some people wander into our woods and are simply never found, Canto Valley repeatedly earns its reputation for strangeness. With everything we deal with on a daily basis, it might surprise you to know that almost none of the houses in the town are empty, and even fewer remain empty for long. The garden house a few blocks away, where the red flowers bloom in the winter, was empty for around 2 years, and that was only because Miss Jennings' daughter had to stay with friends in the town as she recovered from a personal situation. The Hendrickson house was empty for just over a year when I was really little, but Deputy O'Reilly, who was married to one of the Hendrickson daughters, suddenly retired from the army to move in. Even the lot where the Oliveras house had burned down, having caught fire because of the ancient knob and tube wiring the house had used, had only been empty for 6 months before they were able to finish rebuilding it. In fact, if we include some of the stranger homes, such as the abandoned cottage in the middle of the woods, and the old Ash family home on the edge of the woods, only a handful of houses are permanently empty in the town. One of them is my family's old farmhouse on the other side of the Patterson orchard, but my father drops by once a week to check for break-ins, and my brother and I go with him once a month to do maintenance on the yard and field. Another is the home of Mr. Carver. If I had to describe Mr. Carver when I was a little kid, it would be old and scary. Him and the Patterson grandfather, whom I later learned was actually the Patterson great-grandfather, seemed like two of the oldest people I had ever seen. Mr. Carver had a face covered in wrinkles, a head of shock-white hair that seemed to shoot out into random directions, one eye which had a permanent squint which my brother and I had taken to calling his evil eye, and hands which were always wrapped in bloody bandages. His expression was a perpetual scowl, and he spoke like, well, an old man. Maybe you know what I mean when I say that. The kind of man that grew up in the depths of the Great Depression, that fought in the Pacific during World War II, the kind of man that was always gruff and stern and serious, who had no expectation of an easy life, and felt irritated when anyone else expected it. And then there was his dog, an enormous, black-furred Great Dane, one that dwarfed me as a child, one that never barked or whined or growled, but had a watchful, piercing gaze, and when it moved, always moved in total silence. But if I had to describe Mr. Carver now, I would call him cantankerous, yet kind. When my mother passed away, I was just a little girl. I had promised her I would be strong, but after her funeral, I would hole myself up in my room for hours on end, one day after another. My father did his best to help me, and help my brother as well, but looking back, I think all three of us were handling our grief poorly. That year still feels like the worst year of my life. One day, I finally went for a walk outside. I'm not sure why, or even where I was going, but as I did, I passed by Mr. Carver's house, briefly making eye contact with his dog as it watched me from the porch, and there Mr. Carver suddenly was, old and tall and wrinkled, standing at the short gate to his property, calling me over to him. I approached him, the numbness from the grief of my young heart making me less afraid, when he reached out with his hand, a bloody bandage on its back, and rested his palm on my head. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said with an unexpected gentleness. "She was a good woman, reminded me of my wife, rest her soul." I didn't expect that kindness, not from an old man with a stern look and an evil eye. He told me it was okay if I cried, but when the crying was done, I needed to think of all the good things about my mother so that my memory of her wouldn't be filled with sadness. He even said I should tell my brother that it was okay to cry too, as long as he did it in private so that he could be tough for my sake, though I never told my brother this. And suddenly, Mr. Carver went from being a source of fear to a good neighbor. When I would pass by, I would say, "Hi," and he would smile at me, or rather, look at me less severely. When I would talk to him, he would humor me and answer whatever question my childish mind would come up with, no matter how insensitive I could be. "Why does your eye look weird?" "Because I got old." "Why do your hands always have bloody bandages?" "The skin on the back of my hands is thin, so it tears up a lot." "Why do you live by yourself?" "Because God has a sense of humor, and I outlived both my wife and my kids." As for his dog, it spent most of its time lying down and resting on the porch of the house. In fact, I normally only saw it standing up when it wandered over to its red bowl to eat its food. Despite this, I never made an attempt to befriend it or pet it. Perhaps because it was so big that it felt intimidating, or maybe it was how it always trained an eye on me when I passed by, like it was evaluating me. Or maybe it was because Mr. Carver, who was willing to answer all of my inconsiderate questions, would never tell me its real name. He tried to claim its name was Lazy, but after my third attempt at asking him, he replied, "Listen, little girl, his name is one of those things that's not for you to know." So, I stopped asking him, and just took to calling it Dog. Those 4 months I was friends with Mr. Carver might not have resolved my grief or eliminated my pain, but it certainly saved me in more ways than one. My father was constantly overwhelmed, having suddenly become a single parent, and when he wasn't overwhelmed, he would be distracted, staring off into the distance or looking at the family photos on the wall. My brother and I weren't talking, which is hard for me to imagine today. He often had a pale look on his face, and when I would try to speak to him, he would snap at me. And when my father would try to get him to apologize, he would tear up and run to his room. This went on for months, so I took to confiding in Mr. Carver. He wasn't the best listener, but he listened nonetheless, and even gave me advice. When I complained about my father, he told me not to disrespect him and things between us would work out. When I complained about my brother, he told me to be kind to him and he would eventually grow out of his tantrums. When I complained about how his dog always seemed to watch me as I passed, he told me not to mind it, that the dog would have its eyes on everyone at one point or another. When I complained that I didn't have any female friends, he told me that friends were overrated. And when I complained to him about his answer, he told me to just find a girl I wanted to be friends with and to compliment her. And when I finally admitted, telling only Mr. Carver, that I had made friends with a boy I had met near the old Ash family house, he told me, in no uncertain terms, to never meet that boy again, or he would tell my father right away. But one afternoon, as I passed by, his dog opening its eyes to stare at me, Mr. Carver pulled me aside before I could open my mouth to bombard him with one of my myriads of questions. "You're getting attached to me, little girl," he said sternly. "And you need to stop it. I'm going to die soon." His words caught me off guard, and I suddenly felt tears welling up in my eyes, but he didn't end there. "Stop it. I'm old, I'm alone, I'm tired, and this has been a long time coming." He glanced at his dog, and I looked at it too, and my tears dried up instantly. Mr. Carver then made me promise him 2 things. He made me promise that I wouldn't cry when he died. He reasoned that it was okay to cry for my mother, but he was another matter. I tried to tell him I would be sad when he died, but he wouldn't have it. So, I agreed, and a few weeks later, as the ambulance took him away after he passed quietly in his sleep, I kept that promise. Not a single tear was shed. I still missed him, but shortly before his death, things at home became bearable, my relationship with my father and brother finally beginning to repair. Not long after, I would be seated in class next to a girl named Elise, and after a few genuine compliments about her pretty handwriting, she would become my best, and largely only, female friend. And I had already ended the connection I had with the boy I had been playing with near the old Ash family house, as Mr. Carver had demanded. Life was going back to normal. And all of this would be a fantastic ending to a personal tale of overcoming grief through unexpected friendships. But it doesn't yet explain why Mr. Carver's house has remained empty ever since his death. The answer to that question is twofold. First, his grandchildren, who never really knew him, made no efforts to come and take ownership of the home. Second, was his dog. After he died, that large, black Great Dane vanished from sight, yet somehow, it never left. The neighbors would keep the abandoned house clean. Every week they would mow the lawn, trim the hedges, dust and vacuum the interior, and one time they even repainted it. But once a day, every day, one of the neighbors, and occasionally my father, brother, or I, go to Mr. Carver's house, clean out the red dog bowl, and refill it with food. And by the next morning, the bowl would be empty. If none of us would do this, the food bowls of the pets in the neighborhood would be emptied before the pets would be able to eat. And after someone's dog returned home from chasing after a rabbit, the dog's muzzle and flank bloodied from a fight with something much larger than it, the neighbors started to fill the red dog bowl, just as Mr. Carver had for years, and the thefts and attacks came to an end. However, some things didn't end. I would often find paw prints in the dirt larger than my hand, and the coyote pack that wandered into our town would always avoid Mr. Carver's house. And when I would pass his home, I would still feel the eyes of that dog on me, as if it still watched me from the porch. Once, as my brother and I found another one of its paw prints in the dirt, I wondered aloud if other Great Danes got as big as Mr. Carver's was. My brother simply stared at me in surprise before asking, "Great Dane? Wait, you've seen it?" I stuttered and said no, and though he didn't look like he believed me, he dropped the subject. I had almost broken the second promise I made to Mr. Carver that day. After I promised him I would not cry when he died, I also promised I would never tell anyone that, like him, I could also see that black dog that slept on his porch. After all, if I did, it might decide to take up residence at my home next.